A brand new law in Virginia might just rewrite the rules for every future presidential election in America.
Yeah, it genuinely flips the foundational mechanics of how we choose a president completely upside down.
It really does.
Yeah.
So imagine it's election night, right? The Republican candidate has just won the state of Virginia by this massive, undeniable million-vote margin. The citizens of Virginia have spoken clearly.
Right, they've made their choice.
Exactly. But the next morning, Virginia's 13 electoral votes are handed directly to the Democrat.
Which just sounds crazy to most people.
Right. How does that happen? Well, because of a brand new law that changes the rules of the game entirely. And, the architect of this shift in Virginia is Governor Abigail Spanberger.
Who has a pretty interesting background for this kind of move.
Oh, absolutely. She's a former CIA officer, a moderate Democrat, and she just won the Virginia governor's race in this massive 15-point landslide. I mean, she captured 58% of the vote.
Huge mandate.
Yeah, but just months after taking office, she signed a flurry of incredibly controversial election bills. And the public pushback was instant. Her approval ratings plunged to a near tie. We're talking 47% approve and 46% disapprove.
Total nosedive.
Yeah, and the biggest shockwave driving those numbers. Her signature on House Bill 965, this law enters Virginia into the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So it pledges the state's 13 electoral votes to the winner of the National Popular Vote, completely disregarding who actually wins inside Virginia's borders.
Which is why, critics are calling it an unconstitutional power grab, while supporters are praising it as the ultimate realization of true democracy.
And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at a pretty tall stack of sources today. We've got political polling, legal analysis from the Campaign Legal Center, historical documents like the Federalist Papers, and, of course, passionate partisan commentary from both the left and the right. Groups like Stand Up America, the Daily Wire, and the Virginia GOP.
It's a lot to dig through.
It is. Now, to be crystal clear, we are not taking sides today. Our goal is to just impartially unpack the mechanics here. We want to understand how these new laws function, what the U.S. Constitution actually dictates, and exactly how this could fundamentally alter the way your individual vote counts in the future.
And to understand the magnitude of this shift, we really have to look at the political capital required to pull it off in the first place. You mentioned Abigail Spanberger's background. Before politics, she served as an operations officer in the CIA from 2006 to 2014.
Right.
And she flipped a Republican House seat in 2018. She really built her entire brand as this, passionate pragmatist. She even famously reprimanded her own party on a leaked conference call, telling them to abandon radical slogans like defund the police.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I remember that call. She positioned herself as the ultimate safe bet for voters who are just tired of extremes. So I'm trying to figure out how a politician who built a career on playing it safe suddenly becomes the face of this massive, polarizing election overhaul.
Yeah, it's a huge pivot.
Right. What happened between Election Day and her first few months in office?
Well, what's fascinating here is that she interpreted her massive victory as an immediate mandate for sweeping change, defeating Republican Winsome Earl Sears with 58% of the vote in 2025. I mean, that gave her an enormous amount of political capital.
A blank check, almost.
Basically, yeah. And rather than sitting on it, she spent it overnight. From day one, she discarded the cautious, moderate persona. She engaged in a really fierce clash with the outgoing Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, over university board appointments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and on her very first day, she signed 10 executive orders. She rapidly pushed through what she called the Affordable Virginia Agenda. It's this aggressive slate of policies that included a phased minimum wage increase, strict new gun control packages, and a total overhaul of state regulations.
So her shift to aggressive executive action didn't stop at minimum wage or gun control. It extended straight into the operational machinery of how the state functions. And when you pivot from a centrist campaign to governing with a very heavy partisan hand, you burn through your goodwill with moderate voters instantly. That explains the sudden drop to a 47% approval rating. Voters who thought they hired a cautious pragmatist suddenly found an aggressive executive changing the bedrock rules of the state.
And changing the rules of elections requires securing the baseline first. Our sources show that before Virginia lawmakers attempted to alter who receives the state's electoral votes, they passed legislation to strictly control how local officials certify the vote counts.
Right. Because you cannot change the game until you secure the referees. You can't change what the score means until you guarantee nobody can tamper with the scoreboard.
Precisely the logic. And we see this happening at both the federal and state levels. Federally, Congress passed the Electoral Count Reform Act of 2022, or the ECRA. For well over a century, the United States relied on the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which was, frankly, notoriously vague. So the ECRA modernized those rules to remove any ambiguity. It legally restricts the vice president to its strictly ministerial role.
Meaning they just read the results, they don't decide them.
Exactly. The vice president only opens and reads the envelopes. They possess zero legal authority to decide or reject the results. The law also drastically raised the threshold for objecting to a state's electors.
How so?
Well, under the old rules, one single senator and one single representative could halt the certification process. Now it requires a full 1/5 of both chambers of Congress to even register an objection. Furthermore, it sets a hard, undeniable deadline for state governors to certify their results, which for the most recent cycle was December 11th, 2024.
I think of it like replacing a human referee with a digital stopwatch.
Yeah.
You are deliberately removing human discretion from the final score. And Virginia took that exact same concept to the local level with House Bill 78.
Yeah, HB 78.
Right. We have a letter from the R Street Institute in our SAC strongly supporting this specific bill. HB 78 transforms election certification into a mandatory, non-discretionary duty for local officials, meaning they are legally forced to certify the vote counts, regardless of whether they suspect irregularities or simply dislike the outcome.
Well, the intention is to strip local partisan officials of the ability to go rogue. The R Street Institute analysis argues that certifying an election is fundamentally just an administrative math problem.
Just addition.
Right. Officials count the ballots and report the final sum. If a candidate suspects fraud or errors, the proper legal channel is to challenge the results in a courtroom in front of a judge. The channel is not pressuring a local county board member to refuse to sign the certification paperwork.
Think about your own local elections for a second. How important is it that the people counting the votes don't have the power to just reject them? Ensuring that local officials don't possess the arbitrary power to throw out those votes is foundational to maintaining public trust in the system. But once that certification process was mathematically locked down by HB 78, Virginia made its truly seismic move. They changed who actually wins those securely counted votes.
And this is where we arrive at House Bill 965, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
Here's where it gets really interesting. By signing this bill, Virginia pledged its 13 electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote. It helps me to visualize this with a sports analogy, actually.
Oh, let's hear it.
Imagine if the World Series wasn't decided by who won the most individual games, but by who scored the most total runs across the entire 7-game series.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Yeah, so even if a team loses 4-3, if they score more total runs overall, they get the championship trophy. That is the exact mechanical shift this compact applies to the Electoral College. It bypasses the state-by-state contest entirely.
It is a brilliant analogy, but the execution of this compact relies on a very specific legal mechanism called a conditional trigger.
Wait, meaning it doesn't happen right away?
Correct. The law does not take effect simply because Virginia signed it. The compact remains entirely dormant until the member states accumulate a combined total of 270 electoral votes.
Oh, wow. Which is the exact threshold required to win the presidency outright.
Exactly.
It is a highly strategic mathematical bypass. I mean, they don't need a constitutional amendment, and they don't need all 50 states to agree. They just need to hack together exactly 270 electoral votes to effectively render the remaining states mathematically irrelevant.
That is the audacity of the strategy. And with Virginia signing on, the compact currently holds 222 electoral votes.
So they are close.
Very close. They're exactly 48 votes short of activating the trigger and taking total control of the presidential election mechanism. The conservative sources in our stack really emphasize the political makeup of these states, though.
Right. Who's actually in this compact?
Well, every single current member states, like California, New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts, leans heavily Democratic. So these critics view the compact as a partisan maneuver designed specifically by blue states to permanently lock in a national advantage.
Because the shift is so unprecedented, the arguments in our sources are incredibly heated. Let's look at the mechanics of why supporters believe this is the ultimate form of fairness first.
Supporters, like the progressive organizations Stand Up America, center their argument on the concept of equal weight. They argue the compact ensures every single individual vote carries the exact same mathematical value, whether you live in a dense city in California or a rural town in Wyoming.
One person, one vote.
Exactly. They point to polling that suggests 63% of Americans actually favor a national popular vote. And their strongest logistical argument is that the current Electoral College forces candidates to pander almost exclusively to a handful of swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin, while completely ignoring voters in the rest of the country.
That makes sense from a national campaign perspective.
Yeah. Right. They believe activating the compact creates a true representative democracy where national campaigns require national outreach.
But the conservative critics groups like the Virginia GOP and Heritage Action argue this actually destroys representation. They claim this renders Virginia's voters null and void.
It's a sharp contrast.
Yeah, going back to our opening scenario, if a Republican wins Virginia by 1 million votes, but a Democrat runs up the score in places like California and New York to win the national tally, Virginia's electoral votes are awarded to the Democrat. Virginia's electoral weight is handed directly to the candidate Virginia decisively voted against.
Which is why critics argue this mechanism surrenders individual states to mob rule. They warn that campaigns would stop visiting states altogether and simply run massive voter turnout operations in a few densely populated urban centers, places like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York.
So the rural areas just get ignored.
That's the fear. The voices of rural voters and the sovereignty of smaller states would be completely erased by sheer population density.
I am struggling with the critics' argument regarding the logistical fallout, though. I mean, if we were just adding up a national tally, one person equals one vote. That is just basic math, right? Basic addition across 50 states.
Yeah.
Where does the actual nationwide chaos that critics keep warning about come from?
It comes from the mechanism of recounting close elections. Think back to the year 2000.
Oh, the Bush-Gore recount.
Yes. The nation endured a massive, agonizing recount crisis, but that crisis was legally and physically contained within the borders of a single state, Florida.
Right.
The Electoral College inherently acts as a quarantine system. It isolates disputes. If you transition to a national popular vote, that quarantine firewall disappears entirely.
Oh, I see.
Imagine an election separated by just 10,000 votes nationwide. A suspected voting machine error in one single precinct in Nevada could freeze the entire country. You would have legal teams demanding simultaneous recounts in all 50 states, examining every single ballot in the nation just to find those 10,000 votes. The logistical and legal framework of the United States is simply not built to handle a synchronized 50-state recount.
That paints a very different picture. A synchronized 50-state recount would tie up the courts for months. But, this debate goes beyond logistics and fairness. The deepest conflict in our sources revolves around whether this compact is actually legal under the U.S. Constitution.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, our sources direct us back to the Founding Fathers, specifically Alexander Hamilton in Federalist No. 68. Hamilton explicitly argued against a direct popular vote. He designed the Electoral College as a necessary firewall to protect the republic from tumult and disorder.
But how do they envision that firewall actually working mechanically? It wasn't just about stopping a bad candidate, right?
Correct. Hamilton and the framers feared that a direct popular vote would allow a populist demagogue to manipulate the masses in highly concentrated areas. The Electoral College was mechanically engineered to force candidates to build broad, diverse coalitions.
So they have to appeal to everyone.
Right. To win the presidency, a candidate cannot just appeal to one specific industry or one dense region. They have to win the farmers in Iowa, the factory workers in Ohio, and the tech sectors in Virginia. It diffuses power geographically. It was also designed to prevent foreign influence from sweeping through the general population by placing the final decision in the hands of temporary, localized electors.
So the founders intentionally built the exact state-by-state hurdles that Virginia is now trying to bypass.
Yeah.
But fast forward to today, what is the strict, modern, legal argument against a state choosing to allocate its votes this way?
The most prominent legal challenge comes from UCLA law professor Daniel H. Lowenstein. He argues the compact undeniably violates Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution.
What does Article 2 say?
Article 2 dictates that a state legislature must direct how its state appoints electors. The operational word there is its. Lowenstein explains that electors are legally required to represent the state that appoints them.
Meaning Virginia's electors must reflect the will of Virginia's voting process, not California's.
Exactly the point. Lowenstein argues that if Virginia pledges its electors to the national popular vote winner, the voters in California and New York are effectively choosing Virginia's electors by driving up the national total.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right, because a voter residing in Los Angeles cannot legally or plausibly represent the state of Virginia. Therefore, assigning Virginia's electors based on out-of-state votes is a direct violation of Article 2.
So what does this all mean? Beyond Article 2, there is also the issue of the Interstate Compact Clause itself, right?
Right.
The Constitution explicitly states that individual states cannot enter into agreements or compacts with each other without the consent of Congress.
Yes, that's a huge hurdle.
Because this national popular vote movement is, by definition, a contract among states.
Yeah.
So legal experts are warning that even if they hit the 270 threshold, the agreement requires federal congressional approval to be valid. If they get the final 48 electoral votes, does this immediately go to the Supreme Court?
Without a doubt. It guarantees that the moment the 270th electoral vote is secured, it will trigger one of the most explosive Supreme Court battles in American history. You have a coalition of states attempting to fundamentally rewrite the rules of the presidency without passing a formal constitutional amendment.
Which is massive.
It is. The Supreme Court will be forced to rule on whether states can legally hijack the Electoral College through a backdoor conditional contract.
Well, let's look at the incredible sequence of events we have covered today. We started with Abigail Spanberger, a moderate governor who utilized her landslide mandate to implement sweeping executive action, burning through her moderate appeal in a matter of months.
Right.
We examined the federal and state push to lock down local vote counting, treating certification as a strict math problem. And we explored a massive national movement that is currently just 48 electoral votes away from bypassing the Constitution's Electoral College system entirely.
It really is a concerted attempt to dismantle the geographic firewall that Hamilton designed, replacing a system of broad state coalitions with a sheer, unweighted national headcount.
And this brings the entire debate right back to you, listening right now. Whether you live in a deep blue city or a bright red rural town, the activation of this compact fundamentally changes the value and the trajectory of your individual vote.
It changes everything.
It does. If the trigger is pulled, you are no longer voting as a citizen of your specific state. Your ballot is thrown into a massive nationwide pool where giant population centers hold the heaviest mathematical weight. The geographical boundaries that once defined presidential campaigns, they just disappear.
The quarantine firewall comes down, and the entire structure of campaigning shifts to a singular national battlefield.
But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Something that goes entirely beyond the standard left versus right arguments we see in the headlines.
Oh, this is a good one.
If the National Popular Vote Compact actually takes effect, how would it change the existence of third-party candidates? Right now, the mathematical reality of the Electoral College makes it almost impossible for a third-party candidate to win because they cannot secure pluralities in enough individual states.
It blocks them out completely.
Right. But if you remove those state-by-state barriers and turn the election into a simple national head count, could a charismatic third-party candidate suddenly build a massive nationwide base and completely disrupt the American two-party system? Without the Electoral College math to stop them, it's a fascinating consequence that nobody's really talking about yet.
Definitely something to ponder.
Think about it. We will see you next time.